Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Tormenti and welcome to the Hokkaiden Gaijin. The name Hokkaiden means someone from Hokkaido and the name Gaijin meaning a foreign person. Today I'm going to be starting a vlog series on something that can be informative as well as something that's really close to my heart. For the past 4.5 years, I've been living in Japan. Right after I finished my undergrad, I got right on a plane and flew right on over. And long story short, I loved every minute of it. However, I want to give you guys an unbiased opinion on the ins and outs of my life in Japan. I hope this series can be informative and helpful for those who might be looking to visit or even move to Japan. I'm also doing this as a way to look back and see how I could potentially be better if I decide to go back to Japan in any way, shape, or form, whether it be visiting or moving back. Without further ado, let's get right to where it began, which is me getting the job and my flight over. I was hired to be an assistant language teacher for a company called Interact, and I was placed in a city called Sapporo. Interact is an English teacher dispatch company that hires ALTs and sends them to all parts of Japan. The interview, outside of a few phone calls, consists of you just going in with a group of other hopefuls trying to get to Japan. During the interview, you give a mock-up class to the rest of the group, and my advice is just be energetic and Genki. Besides that, you have a one-on-one interview with the recruiter as they ask you some other questions that have to do with Japan and how flexible you are and many different things like that. Now, even though you are asked to be flexible, you can kind of give your opinions and wants on where you want to be located. They ask you for your list of 3 places that you would like to be in Japan, and I even checked off I didn't want a driving position because that is another thing that you can do. And because they're not going to place you in the popular cities like Tokyo or Kyoto, for a newbie like me with no experience at the time, I was put into the cold north of Hokkaido. At first, I was a little upset, honestly, due to it being not on the mainland, but after a ton of research on the area, big shout out to Only in Japan's channel, specifically John Dobb. So if you want to look up some amazing info and stuff about Japan, look up Only in Japan episodes that were from the very beginning that featured John Dobb, as well as check out his new channel, which is just called Only in Japan John Dobb. But enough of that little plug. From that, I was able to see that Sapporo was a super exciting place that I was ready to get on over to. Plus, there is tons of snow. And when I mean tons of snow, I mean like 8 months of the year's winter. 8 months of winter can be very daunting to a lot of people, but for those of you who quite enjoy the snowy winter and also just don't like cockroaches because they're never around, Hokkaido is definitely the place for you. Now, let's move on from the job aspect as we can get into a later episode about what that job actually entails and how the training and everything like that was, and we're going to go right into the flight. I had purchased my ticket for around $800 one way from Raleigh-Durham Airport to my final destination of New Chitose Airport. Now, I had 2 separate flights. It was just cheaper to buy a flight that went from Raleigh all the way to LA and then a separate ticket from LA to Sapporo. Now, my route was very convoluted to say. I had a lot of layovers and changing flights. My route was Raleigh to Atlanta, all the way to LAX, and then after that to Tokyo, and then finally to Sapporo. My first flight was heading to Atlanta on April 7th, but unfortunately my flight was canceled due to a storm. And because I had bought 2 separate things, it kind of messed up and threw a wrench into my plans. You see, even though my flight from North Carolina all the way to LA was covered by, the airline because they're like, this wasn't your fault, my flight from LA to Sapporo was completely separate. So they didn't see it as a fair reason for me to get a free change. So I had to pay an extra $400 just to get my flight changed. Yeah, that really sucked. However, on April 9th, my flight finally went off without a hitch to Atlanta. After a couple hours, it was time for me to fly across the country to LAX, which is actually my first time ever setting foot in LA, and California for that matter. These flights were on Delta Airline, which honestly wasn't too bad. Delta Airlines was pretty good, and I would honestly say I'd take them again. Because even with my first flight canceled, they gave me a voucher of $500, which didn't actually get used because I was in Japan and they don't, have Delta, so it didn't really matter. But enough of that. I'm in LA now. LAX is quite big and quite daunting. And arriving in LAX was kind of a difficult pill to swallow because I got in around 10 p.m., California time, and my flight doesn't go out till the next day at 1 p.m. So yeah, I literally had over 12 hours of a layover and no hotel booked, so guess who just sat in the airport and stayed awake all night? Because quite frankly, I didn't really trust anyone around me because, being in an airport by yourself with a bunch of your stuff and a lot of money in your pocket doesn't really bode well. But without that, finally April 10th arrives. I am exhausted, and I was finally boarding my flight to Tokyo. And everything went perfectly well and happily ever after, right?
Wrong.
That was not the case at all. Though the flight itself was actually a super nice experience. I was going through United Airlines, or what was actually ran by ANA, which means it was really an ANA flight, which ANA was one of the best flight experiences I've ever had, and they are a main airline in Japan, so if you ever have the opportunity to take ANA, seriously do it. Even if it costs a little bit extra money, it's totally worth it. The staff are amazing as well. It's just the flight is comfortable and accommodating. I can get more into that in a later episode when I talk about Japanese airports and different flights. This journey was super hectic and never left a dull moment. It was stressing me out, though. Our flight was a bit late landing into Tokyo, and it was raining. I was supposed to have 2 hours to go through immigration and get all my stuff from customs, as well as to get it through and checked on for my next flight, but I only ended up having 1 hour. And man, was I starting to freak out. I still had to get on the flight to Sapporo, to the place I was trying to end up in. And, it was stressful, but luckily I was able to get into the front of the line because they were letting people who had to go through immigration cut to the front if they had a connecting flight, which, yes, luckily I was one of those people. And Japanese airports and staff are quite efficient, and they're always friendly and able to help out. And like I said, I'll definitely go into this more in detail later on. After frantically getting to my next flight, from the help of the airport staff, of course, I was finally on my last flight to the final point of my journey. I took a total of 4 flights, and on April 11th, 2 days after I began my journey, because, we kind of go over that dateline thing, which, moves you forward in time like a freaking time traveler, I was finally in Sapporo, where a member of Interact picked me up and took me to 7-Eleven to get some essentials and a meal before they took me to my apartment. And speaking of my apartment, here it is. This is the layout of my apartment, and quite honestly, it was pretty small, but it was home. It was my very first apartment that I personally owned myself. I was tired and ready to get some sleep, but first I figured out the internet and made sure to let my family and friends know back home that I was safe and made it to my destination. Now, this apartment also only cost me about 44,000 yen, which is roughly $400, which for a single person apartment, that's insane in America. And I was quite happy with it, even though it was a little dinky. Now, I'm also going to tell you about what I would have done differently, or how I felt about this experience first time traveling to Japan, and with the job that I got as well. We'll start with the job, with Interact. Would I go back and do Interact or a ALT position again if I moved back to Japan? And honestly, yeah. Even though during my time there I might have had some complaints and some things that I really didn't like about it, I think overall that might have been because I was a lot younger and maybe a little bit more immature. Now that I'm older and I actually kind of like teaching and helping people learn new things, I think I would absolutely give teaching another go. And I would go through Interact again, at least for just 1 year. Interact is a great company to help you get to Japan, and after a year or two, you try to find something else or get direct hire by a school. And as for the flight, would I do anything different? Yeah, I would. I would absolutely do something different. I think even though I tried to save money on buying 2 separate tickets, it ended up actually costing me more because of the quite unfortunate incident of me having a, flight delay or flight cancellation due to a storm. Next time, I would absolutely just buy 1 ticket that has all the connecting flights already with it. That way, if one flight gets canceled, the rest of them are taken care of. And that was my journey to Japan, my very first time getting a job and flying on over. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to be notified on more stories and info on Life is Japan, As well as to support this channel, please subscribe and hit that bell so you guys can get notified. Lastly, if you have any questions about today's topic or anything else Japan related, please feel free to leave a comment below and I will get back to it as soon as possible, as I'm going to be reading all the comments. Last but not least, I am the Hokkaiden Gaijin, and this is my retrospective of Japan. See you guys next time.